Today's businesses are on a vigilant watch for threats in an ongoing cyber war. It's time to get real-world solutions to protect and secure your valuable business information anytime, anywhere. Welcome to Cybersecurity America.
Chris is a partner at Alex Security Labs, and he's a founding partner at Reasonableness. Now, Chris is a principal author of the DoCRA standard and the CIS-RAM, Center for Internet Security's risk assessment method. Since 2010, Chris has helped his clients manage their information security risk to an evidence-based, reasonable level. Now, Chris worked as an expert witness and has helped his clients, regulators, and litigators to determine the reasonability of security controls and programs during regulatory oversight or post-breach legal action. Well, Chris, welcome to the show. So glad to have you.
Glad to be here. Thanks. I've been listening to the podcast and watching your interviews, and happy that you're doing what you're doing out there, keeping people educated. So appreciate the show.
Well, thank you, Chris. Now, that was your short in bio, but did I cover everything you're doing? What are some of your background that you think would be good enough?
Yeah, I mentor people early in their career, and think about, we're roughly the same age. People who came up in cybersecurity like us didn't always come through, maybe didn't even typically come through like computer science, right? And the cybersecurity courses that they taught in college in the 80s and 90s, which didn't exist. Most of us came into cybersecurity by way of something else. Like we would bring our knowledge of another field into cybersecurity to try to make it make sense in the way that we knew. And my background is actually as an academic. I was interested in American history, and I was all but doctored in American history. So
I love it, right?
And I studied the history of law. I was real interested in the idea that we work out our character and our ethics and our desire for what we want the country to be, often through policy and law. So I was really interested to see how law has been used to sort of be the place where we fight out our challenges and we try to come to definitions about what the right thing is for society and ourselves. But I always worked my way through college doing computer work. So I would, be the IT guy for a small company type thing. And then I would work for bigger and bigger companies. And after a while I was thinking, I love American history, but it's sort of better as a hobby because I really love this computer work. And then as cybersecurity came into being, I noticed that there was this calculation that we used in risk management. That was risk equals impact times likelihood.
Yeah.
That was just about the same thing that we used in law to say the burden of a risk should not be greater than the probability times the liability. And I was thinking, so if we're able to use this legal calculus in cybersecurity, we could probably figure out how to get the technologists and the lawyers to understand each other. And that's been a running theme through my career.
Well, it's a big gap to fill there. I've been dealing with lawyers for a long time, and to be able to bridge the gap between them. So it's the process of taking some process in nature or in something in history you see and applying that in a context that is foreign to you, but you can explain it in legal principles more than you could bits and bytes in the computer.
It's going to have cost-benefit analysis involved. So we can't have a regulation that is more burdensome than the risk it's supposed to reduce.
Mm-hmm.
So you got a factory with a smokestack. You don't want mercury residue to go throughout the neighborhood near the factory. So you're going to put a filter on. If someone says, yeah, I could put filters on, but they would clog up the smokestack and I can't make this thing anymore that people say they want. Well, you got to figure out how do you reduce the mercury fallout and make the product. And the controls you use, the law calls reasonable. The engineers and lawyers figure that problem out in manufacturing. Cybersecurity and lawyers have to figure that out in the field. What's the control that allows business to operate to its legitimate business purpose without being overly burdened to protect people? That's the way we bring everyone together.
Yeah, that seems to be like the balance of life, right? I mean, if you would think Congress would have something like that. I'm going to make this law, and if it doesn't have the intended effect, or it's so burdensome that it needs to be adjudicated in the court system. So yeah, it seems like we're just melding the two worlds together, and really business sits on the top of those.
Yeah. It's funny you put it in terms of, if I'm hearing you right, wouldn't it be great if people actually paid attention to this balancing act? And it's so funny. I've got to make a long story short, but to me, as a person who's involved both in cybersecurity and the history of regulation, I just bloody love this story. I was at a conference once where an attorney who was the key lobbyist in writing the high-tech update to the HIPAA security rule was telling us the story about how she pushed this legislation through that became high-tech. And there are multiple components to high-tech, but one of them is that you demonstrate your security by this balance of reasonableness. Did you do this reasonable security test? And you figure that out through a risk assessment. So I went to her afterward and I said, how did you know to put a risk assessment into this legislation to demonstrate reasonableness? Like, you didn't say, I know you did security right if you never got breached. That didn't go in. You didn't say, I know you're secure if you put every possible control in place. But you didn't say that. You said, I know that you're doing the right thing by security if you've done a risk analysis to figure out the reasonable safeguarding, you put that in place. How did you know to do that? You're an attorney, you're a lobbyist, right? She said, what are you talking about? I said, it's right there in the reg. I see it right there in the reg, balancing test. You said you wrote every letter of this statute. She said, oh yeah, I wrote the statute. I didn't write the regulation. And then she explained rulemaking. Of course, you learn this when you're a kid, but you forget how it works when you're in the battlefield of cyber law, right? The legislature makes the law. It says, hey, Health and Human Services, you got to do this HIPAA thing for health information portability and make sure it's secret in the process. No one abuses this patient data. Got it. Health and Human Services gets it, and they say, well, here are all these things we're going to do to be sure health information is portable. And here's how it's going to be secure. Then they send it to the Office of Management and Budget, where there's this person who every time there's a regulation that goes through, this is how she explains it, this lobbyist. They got this like 12 different stamps. They make sure it goes onto every regulation. Boom, boom, this one, boom, this one, boom. So Office of Management and Budget is basically making sure about a dozen rules go into every legislation, or every regulation that's made. So then I talked to this historian. What's that?
They just go by default?
Yeah, because here's why. You get these executive orders that say every regulation will have the following requirements. And one of them is this cost benefit test. So the lobbyist didn't know that there'd be a cost benefit test to demonstrate reasonable security controls. Health and Human Services didn't know there'd be a balancing test to figure out the reasonable cybersecurity controls. The person at the Office of Management and Budget was just taking a rule that was invented in 1993 and plopping, copy and paste into the regulation. And then it goes out and then people go to enforce this. The balancing test has been there the whole time, but no one knew. Yeah. So it's interesting you pointed out, geez, it'd be great if Congress knew. Yeah, it would be. But it turns out that even if they don't, it's going to go to the regulation.
So regulations can be enacted almost by accident.
Yes, some regulatory rules. Right. But what's really interesting, though, what I really love is that when you try to find out why did risk balancing tests end up in the regulation, it's not by accident. Because this idea of cost benefit, we definitely used to enter American law firmly in something called the learned hand test in 1947. This case about bringing flour over to the soldiers in World War II. I won't go into the details, but a judge named Learned Hand, who was in New York at the time, said, you've got a reasonable safeguard if the burden of the safeguard isn't greater than the probability of the liability. And that's that risk equals impact times likelihood calculus. But he didn't invent this whole cloth. There's a whole legal history that comes back from England about how reasonableness is this balancing test of the reasonable person, the reasonable man test. Well, England didn't invent it. It came from France when they had this, le moyen, which the medium man, with the average man rule in France. But they didn't invent it because it goes back and back and back to the golden rule, where you do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's our definition for fairness in the West. And it's been in law ever since. And if you go to try to figure out whether you've got a reasonable safeguard, you're asking a golden rule question. I'm going to do unto others as I would have them do unto me. But they wouldn't want me to go bankrupt to prevent a breach because they want my business. They want to do business with me. So applying the golden rule to my business is applying the golden rule to my customers. And as long as you do that, when regulators have seen the risk analysis after a breach, they go, yeah, this was reasonable. You were doing what you could to protect everybody, but you didn't overextend yourself. We can't ask anymore. And they turn away and go on to another case. It's fascinating how it all worked out, but
how do you define reasonable? Like, it seems cultural. Like, it's reasonable to do this in this culture. It's reasonable to do that in this culture. But
yeah.
then all of a sudden, it's such a loose term that you just define it however you want. What's reasonable?
Yeah. If people are focused on a specific behavior, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like, it's reasonable to walk into a home in the United States with your shoes on. It's not reasonable to do that in most every other country in the world, right? You're right. Culturally, certain behaviors are considered the right and wrong thing to do. But what we're doing with reasonableness isn't to say this is the appropriate control for anybody. What we do is we say, I want to see how you reasoned this one out. Reasonable. How did you reason this one out? Why did you think this was the right safeguard for this situation? And you'd say, I could foresee the shopkeeper who's got an icy sidewalk in front of their shop, right? We want to know that shopkeeper said, my customers or anyone passing by could slip on that ice and get hurt. I'm going to salt that down or shovel it away. That's the reasonable thing to do because you can foresee a problem, but you're not going to do anything extraordinary. You're just going to ice it down or shovel it away. Let's say you're that shopkeeper, you get that ice out of the way. 4 hours later, there's been sleet, you've got a busy shop, things are okay. Someone slips and falls after you've salted, and they can say, hey, you should have taken care of your sidewalk. You can say, look, I did what was reasonable. The other thing that I could have done is hired someone to every 15 minutes, half hour, just constantly sweep, but nobody else is doing this. That's not a standard control. What I did was reasonable. You saw it was hailing, you could have taken care too. But that's reasoning. It's the idea that would I have asked you as a shopkeeper to go above and beyond, to go greater than the harm that could have been produced? So that it's the reasoning rather than the action.
Yes.
So yeah, and the reasoning has been fairly universal. It's the golden rule.
And could you use statistics? Something like, for instance, all companies have antivirus. Let's just say that. Let's say 99% of all companies have antivirus. Could you argue in court if that company did not have one, that does not meet reasonability because reasonability was defined by the market that said that has 99% coverage of everything, and you're the 1% that didn't? That became reasonability.
Yeah, Joshua, that's great. That's a question of the standard of care, right? So the way this applies, and by the way, reasonability applies in the office far more often and far earlier than it ever does in a regulatory or litigation context. But you're exactly right. So we work on cases. We'll support defense. We'll support plaintiffs. We'll support regulators. We'll support our clients when they're talking to regulators. So the one rule carries the interest of any party involved. But what we do in these cases is, let's say we're working with plaintiffs on a case and someone says, hey, there was this breach at this organization and they didn't have this antivirus. It's antivirus that everyone else has. We'd say, yeah, okay, you've got a good case. They'd say, well, how would you make the case? We'd say a few things. One is we believe that antivirus is the standard of care. Who doesn't do it? Now, it doesn't mean that antivirus is ubiquitous in every system all the time, or the best antivirus or the most effective antivirus is on every system all the time. But then we say to the plaintiff's attorney who are busy suing, and the plaintiffs are saying, I think this breach business wasn't reasonable. Then we say, well, we think of a two-part test. One, were they applying the standard of care? And you just indicated a really good way of figuring that out. Are they doing something different than everyone else is? Another is, were they supposed to apply a control standard that they didn't fully apply? But two different ways to ask that same question. And then we tell the defendant, show us your reasoning for not doing that, because the word reasonable has to be applied here. Very often they can't.
Both support.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we encourage people, put your work on paper, show how you thought about yourself and the other people you could have harmed, and the reason why you chose the safeguard you did, and how it was proportionate to that risk. And regulators and plaintiffs' attorneys will lose interest in you when things go wrong.
Well, Chris, you and I talked about putting a couple learning slides together that would talk about
Yeah.
Really informational things that I thought was fascinating when I saw it. So I'm going to turn that over to you.
Good. Okay, good. What I like to do ever I have a conversation about this stuff, I'll reintroduce. Are you seeing this in full screen now?
Man,
Okay. What I like to do when I describe this material to people is make sure that at the end of the day, they know what to do. They know what they can do to actually make this work. So we'll start with some explanations, and then I want to point to some resources that we'll have in the comments. We'll have links to a lot of things that I'll talk about, and I'll mention where you can, when of the things I talk about, what you'll see in the comment. So we call this duty of care risk analysis, short DoCRA. You see it come up in settlements. You see it come up in, we mentioned CIS's risk assessment method, but it's got these three basic rules. You're going to do risk analysis, but when you do, you're not going to do risk analysis the way people typically do, where they say, what's the risk to me? What is the probability of a dollar lost to my company? You are going to do that, but you also then have to say, and what is the probability of harm to other people who I foreseeably can hurt? So that's the first rule. You're going to pay as much attention to people you can harm as to your own risk. The next is that you're going to target an acceptable level of risk that means that no one would need some kind of repair. So what that would mean is my goal doesn't mean that I know I will 100% have achieved it. But remember, we're talking about the process, the reasonability. I want to know that my goal for risk is to make sure that whatever goes on, any party would have accepted the risk or the harm that resulted. A way to talk about that in terms of privacy, someone was able to break into my system and they were able to get a listing of all the first names of my customers. I'm not happy about that, but what can someone do with a bunch of first names? Nothing. It's not a negligible event, but it is acceptable because we can't imagine the kind of harm that can result to a third party if that happened. It would be unacceptable if I had the names, full contact information, other things that bad people can use to create fraud. Then that becomes unacceptable. So I want to drive my risk to a target that says, I want to be sure that people are going to be safe from harm that has to be repaired.
which is the data classification, correct?
Right. Yeah, exactly. It can be data classification. It can also be a safeguard around data. So I used to say, the example I used to give was encrypted data, well encrypted data. But, we're seeing a concern now that encrypted data files that we have now can be decrypted later fairly quickly once our tech gets better. So but we have to think carefully about what we mean by an acceptable level of risk. Third is that we want to use a safeguard that's no more burdensome than the risk we're reducing, meaning the cure can't be worse than the disease. I gave an example of sidewalk stuff. We're not going to ask that shop owner to put in a heated sidewalk to make sure no one ever slips on ice, because the cost of that heated sidewalk is going to be greater than the probability of the liability that would result from someone slipping there. But those are the three rules. And what happens when you do this is you get a really clear understanding of why a risk matters to you and to other people. You have a real clear way to communicate to the business on a consistent basis. Here's why we care about this one more than that one. And if something were to go wrong and you get a regulator or a litigator knocking at your door, you're saying, hey, the people who you represent, your client or the public, we were focused on making sure they were really okay. And that's all we can say for reasonable. And once you've defined reasonable, it's hard for them to say you weren't reasonable because they have to have a better definition of reasonable. So those are the basic three rules. For people who do risk analysis, this looks a little kludgy, but what I'm trying to do here is say, where you typically see risk equals impact times likelihood, here we're saying you're going to say risk equals three kinds of impact. Impact to your mission, the reason why people want to do business with you. Your impact to your objectives, which are the reason why you want to do business, profitability, growth, that kind of thing. And the impact to your obligations to protect people. So when you consistently include those things in every risk analysis, guess what? You're going to start to have evidence that you're looking out for everyone as much as yourself. Then what we do is we evaluate the safeguard the same way. So if I say, I've got this safeguard that I think will slow down business, but it will protect people, I need to know how much it's going to slow down business. If it slows down more business than it helps people, it's by definition not reasonable. So that's what that step 2 and 3 are for. A little kludgy to demonstrate, but it's the quickest way I can demonstrate how DoCRA works without going into.
But it makes sense. You have a mission, you have objectives, and you have obligations.
Yeah.
Never really put it in those buckets like that. I think that's a good way of the way you have it structured.
What's funny too is if you look at, say, this cybersecurity framework, and they say that your risk has to take into account your mission and your objectives as a business, you've got obligations to the people you're trying to protect. They're using the right terms. They just never put it into a construct before.
I was trying to articulate it. You did a good way of saying right there. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone who's gone through a NIST special publications document or the cybersecurity framework sees, I get what you're trying to tell me. I don't exactly know how to do it.
Yeah.
Remember that story I told with the regulators not exactly getting this concept of reasonableness that's in the stamp that comes from the Office of Management and Budget and all that?
To make them aware.
Well, the regulators, like every administrative body in the executive, is limited in their rulemaking ability. They can write a rule that's no more specific than the law that gives authority to that administrator. So if there's a law that says Department of Health and Human Services may require or must require multi-factor authentication, then Health and Human Services can explicitly say, we require multi-factor authentication. Without specific permission or requirement from Congress, an executive branch department can't be more specific than the law tells them to be. It's a rulemaking conscience that these administrative bodies have. So when NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is under the executive, gives guidance for how to do risk analysis and what the security controls are, they're giving you standards of care, but they're never really very specific, because if they get specific, then they're concerned, we think we may be overdoing our role in rulemaking. We can't legislate from the executive. So that's why you never really see specific instructions coming from NIST. You see objectives and high-level guidance. If you read 800-53, it's like reading Mad Libs when we were kids, where you have to fill in the noun, the verb, and the adjective and the adverb. You don't know what to do. And they're doing that on purpose. They're saying, you need to figure it out, public. You have to figure out what you're going to do. We can't be specific here. So
I want to give you the framework, and you got to figure out how to implement it in your environment, in your industry, because the law can't be that specific to cover so many different instances.
And where the law isn't specific, the executive can't be more specific. Isn't that challenging?
It is.
What goes on then with a federal agency or a regulator is that people say, geez, I wish you'd be, like a company would say 2 things. I wish you'd be more specific, so I know when I'm breaking the rule. And then once they see too much specificity from a regulator, they say, hey, you can't tell me how to run my business. So the regulator is saying, look, it's up to you people to figure out what reasonable is. If you don't like how we're doing it, you got to figure it out for yourself. So we did this.
It's interesting. When I was at Whitney Bank, we had regulators, the OCC would come in. And so I was the head of security, as a VP of information security there. And they would come in and they had to have 2 VPs that were there. But it was always human nature. We would ask, how was reasonability approved at that other bank? So we said, what problem? Well, we're going to roll this system. They had that over at this other bank. I mean, y'all audited them, right? And so we were all just figuring out, what can we do to make it go away? And if they all like this shiny thing, and they've all had reasonability and they all like that, let me get that shiny thing and all these OCC findings go away.
Yeah.
So you can just always trying to push for what were their definition of reasonable, and they would never tell you. They would never try to give you any guidance. So they were just trying to set you up for a finding. But when you explain it, it's just their job was to give general guidance in order to be able to drive in a certain direction. And specificity is up to you. That makes so much more sense.
Yeah. And it really, you can understand the conscience. And as a student of history and as a fan of history, the balance of power is extremely important. It just creates some of these weird inefficiencies. But It also allows the marketplace to come together to say, here's what we believe reasonable is. So sometimes you get standards bodies, professional organizations who say, these are the standards of our practice, like medicine and law, and any professional organization will say, these are the standards of our practice. And we've got a profession that licenses or works with states to license their use as a profession. But these are the rules that we as the professionals have decided people should operate to. So if a professional, a dentist, is supposed to do certain things with Novocaine, and they decide, I'm not going to use Novocaine. I'm not going to even tell people I'm not using Novocaine. I'm going to give them saline shots before I drill holes into their teeth. People would say before the law ever did, that's not the standard of care. And you can't be a dentist anymore. And the law says, great, market figured out what reasonableness was for that area. There isn't a profession for cybersecurity. So we've got certifications, but we don't have state licenses. And that means that we don't have standards bodies. We don't have professional bodies that say you are licensed to be a forensic specialist, and you're licensed to be a penetration tester, and you're licensed to be a data architect or network architect or a risk analyst. There's no such thing. So what do? If we don't have a standards body, we will come together as a community and say, well, this is our definition for reasonableness. And you, dear attorney, should recognize it because you learned it in law school. It's the learned hand test. We use the same thing for risk analysis and cybersecurity. So let's come to agreement on what we're saying.
So isn't this really indicative of life, right? For us to start flying planes, we had to stop smashing them into the ground. So a couple rules on when to fly them and at what altitude and all that took a couple years before air travel was safe. And look at all the other industries as well. So the rules are part of life I see across, not just cybersecurity. It just hasn't been applied a great degree here in cybersecurity because it's been really kind of difficult here. Yeah, I definitely see where just being able to push those rules and regulations, get the body moving forward. So when we have incident come up that we're not all prepared for, at least we have some guidance and some past understanding in order to be able to make those decisions moving forward.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Early on, and I love the example of air flight because this is one of those things that had a tremendous advantage. It had a tremendous advantage for everything: agriculture, mail, commerce, warfare, right? The world got smaller because people could get farther places faster. It's just extraordinary what we could do with this. The opportunity was tremendous and it was dangerous. So it was worth doing, but then it was also worth figuring out how to get better at over time. And then soon enough, you'd have an FAA that would say, we got to have rules so these things that are flying aren't bumping into each other. We don't want the planes to touch. The FAA had to say, well, while the engineers are coming up with standards for creating planes, and there are flight schools to come up with standards for how to fly, we also have to have rules to make sure that planes don't touch each other. So the regulator comes in and says, we'll make sure that people aren't hurting each other in the process. We'll help enforce the standards that you create as a profession, the engineers and the pilots. And then we'll make sure that you're playing in a way that you don't bump into each other, right? It's a great analogy. What we've done, this partnership we did with Center for Internet Security, is we said, look, you're a nonprofit. Center for Internet Security is a fantastic organization. For those that don't know, it's always been a nonprofit. And it started out providing benchmarks for a safe configuration of devices of all kinds, network devices, services, workstations, you name it. And then they started to get involved in standards of practice. And they adopted what had been called the consensus audit guidelines at the SANS Institute that people called the SANS Top 10 or SANS Top 20. Yeah, SANS Top 20, sorry.
It looks.
Yeah.
I rolled their certification.
Yeah, I've taken courses and been certified there too. It's extraordinary, right? Because it's very practical, very different from what we see with regulations. It's here's how to do it. But I will also say that what it's done for my career is extraordinary. But the consensus audit guidelines then was transferred over to Center for Internet Security as a nonprofit that could help us live and grow. And you have mission-minded people from different branches of the Department of Defense, like NSA and the Air Force, et cetera, running that nonprofit and making sure that everyone, including public organizations like through the MSISAC for states and municipalities, are getting the best of breed tools and processes, but they didn't have this risk assessment method. So Haylock worked with Center for Internet Security and said, we can't be doing this by ourselves. This method is getting a lot of people out of danger. Let's transfer this to the public domain as intellectual property. But then in CIS, let's have this risk assessment method that tells people step by step how to do this. So if you've got NIST controls or ISO controls or HIPAA security rule or banking rules, and you need to demonstrate reasonableness, we can show you step by step how to conduct that risk analysis so you can operate your organization reasonably and with evidence. So we'll have a link to the CIS RAM in the comments, so people can find that there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. I definitely want to research more on that because this is an interesting topic.
Yeah. I'll just touch on a couple of things here. In terms of adoption, we're talking about it. This isn't just some kind of highfalutin hope. We're seeing it show up in law. So there are a lot of regulatory settlements that are citing DoCRA as the definition for reasonableness. So a state or multi-state settlement will say to a breached organization, you didn't do as well as you could. That's why you hurt people. We're going to fine you this much money. You've got to demonstrate reasonable cybersecurity controls over X number of years. What we mean by reasonable is, and then they give DoCRA as the example. They also give CIS RAM, and they mention a paper by the Sedona conference called a commentary on a reasonable security test. So we'll have a link for that too in the comments. That's a really good read for the attorneys. So if you're a cybersecurity person and you need your general counsel to be behind you, have them read that Sedona conference paper. The DoCRA standard is the document that the regulators are now citing as this definition for reasonable. And then we've got the actual CIS RAM standard. We're calling it standard here. CIS doesn't like to call their document standards. They say, guidelines or that. But those are the instructions and work papers that if you just read the instructions and use the work paper, at the end of that effort, you'll have a risk assessment. So it's made to be very, very step-by-step practical, right?
And do you see if further adoption of this standard really reducing like insurance costs and everything, and litigation and so forth, if we adopt kind of this approach?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Yes. So we've got clients who've been using DoCRA either with the CIS controls or with other controls that come to them by contract. And what they're finding, the insurance is the purple all the way to the right here. But what we've found is that when someone is demonstrating reasonableness and they've had a breach, when a regulator or a plaintiff's attorney comes by, I've had experience in all these scenarios, and they say, show me that you were applying reasonableness. When that breached organization says, here is my risk analysis, I was taking care of your client to the plaintiff's attorney or your constituency to the regulator as much as I was taking care of myself. My investments, my priorities were based on their harm. And I was applying controls that weren't greater than the risk to them. That's what reasonable is. Again, that's the definition of reasonableness that the lawyers learned, all the lawyers learned in the same, law school classes. So if you have a better definition for reasonable that counters that, then you've got a case. If you don't, you walk away, and they don't, because this is the one definition that's out there. Now, what does that mean for insurance? It means that an insurance carrier can say, we see in our claims studies that say 40% of our breach claims go to liability related costs and 60 go to handling the breach. Then the companies that are demonstrating DoCRA and can hold that up as evidence when something goes wrong is a 40% lower risk to my portfolio than companies that don't. Because they're just not going to be found liable. They've got to argue the court more. Yeah, the plaintiffs and regulators will. And now the insurance carrier, using their own data about what is going toward liability related charges, they can say that's the lower risk that this DoCRA using policyholder is to me. Right. And we've had some of our clients get better underwriting from their insurance carriers as a result. And now we're working with some brokers and carriers to say, here's how to easily detect in underwriting whether someone's actually living this life. So yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So see a potential negative consequence of this. Well, things I saw in the incident response world. So that's what I do, right? It's incident response.
Yeah.
Companies get broken into. That's my specialty, as well as virtual system. But one thing we just kind of saw in working for the incident response company, especially on the insurance side, nobody provides deliverables anymore, like a written
Yeah,
report of what
exactly.
happened.
Yeah.
And man, in cybersecurity for a long time, we always wrote reports. Then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, we don't write reports no more. And I would get brought into an incident investigation. So it'd be post breach. We need to figure out what happened, what was the root cause, all that. I was great. Show me the report. And the report doesn't exist. And so
Yeah.
you have to go interview one of them. And it was all because it was being used in litigation for DoCRA. And so they just cut it out. And so to me, that was harmful. I can't tell what happened in the last security event because the insurance companies don't want you to write a report about it anymore, because then it can't be discoverable. And what they try to do is say that you should have known that that web proxy server wasn't in place and working. You should have known that server that was sitting on the internet. They're always trying to find some fault in their security stack or some risk management process or something they did in order to shift liability. And so I think that's just really been a harmful effect of it. I think everything you just said from reasonability sounds great. And that sounds like that's the reason we don't have reports anymore in many ways. But it could have some negative consequences from it as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, it could. So one of the things that we do, we're in a litigation and we've got a very brief report, is the insurance carriers don't like this, but this is what makes liability cost so much. We have to say, well, we got to go deeper into discovery. And as soon as an organization says, because they think they got you, right? When we're on the plaintiff or the regulator side, the defense thinks, oh, we got them because now, how are they going to know what to look for in discovery? We can say, hey, we wiped those logs clean as part of the cleanup after the incident or something. So we always go in with specialists saying, but wait a minute, according to PCI DSS, you were supposed to hold on to those records for a year, or if that applied. Or, well, if that was okay to do, let me see in your incident response plan that said it's okay to wipe evidence away from oh, that's not in our plan. Okay. Now, so they dig themselves deeper. But the thing that always puts someone into a difficult position when they're trying to hide something is for us to say, let's see your risk assessment. That's something that is not provided under privilege. And if someone attempts to provide it under privilege, it's a very difficult thing to do, because it's not, you don't do your risk assessment to answer a legal question. You do your risk assessment to know how to manage your cybersecurity program. So we say, show us your risk assessment. And then when they say, but we don't have one, or is this what you mean? And they don't do that, then it becomes very easy to say, how could you possibly say you're being reasonable when you never had evidence that you were managing your program toward the safety of our customer or the public? So you're right. I'm showing the dark side that you go down when you don't provide evidence from a report. If you're very transparent and you say, this is our program, this is what we had in our program to take care of these people and us. Hey, this is what happened in the incident. This is how we know. This is whole area we don't know because our controls weren't sufficient enough to give you the forensics on this. So this is a mystery to us. That goes way better for a company than hiding stuff.
Yeah. Well, I could tell you one part of that is like in BEC attacks or business enterprise compromise. So it's email based attacks. In the Microsoft environment, they have a logging level called E5P2.
Yeah.
Now, you have to have that logging level and that license, or you can't see message to message logging. So if a mailbox got compromised, I can see mail going outbound, for instance, in logs. But without that license, I can't see what emails went between mailboxes inside the organization. The log does not get captured. And even if I do pay for it afterward, the data is gone. That verbosity wasn't captured during the activity, so it'll never be there. Those are ideas of, we didn't even know that was like that. And why with that licensing level. So you can see that would be some reasonability if they really thought that they did have logging turned on and they would see message to message. And then, oops, we have an incident and you find out you don't because of you didn't have this license turned on. Then it comes back to, did you willfully not pay for that license because you just didn't want to know? That's a harder thing to say, that somebody just willfully didn't pay for things because they don't want to know in an incident, because we're cybersecurity guys, we want to know everything. Whole logs, we want to figure out everything. So to say we just don't want to know and we want to live willfully blind, that's a hard argument to make.
Yeah. I've been in the world of law in our conversation, but in practice, here's what happens when you get cybersecurity people who say, look, we need the C5 license. because of forensics and increased control and increased control of data movement and all sorts of things that an E5 license will get you. You have to go to your boss and general counsel. And very often you find people who say, I don't want to spend more money than I have to. My email's working fine. Thank you. Go find something else to spend money on. The thing that the risk analysis does, and if you go through that CIS-RAM stuff, you'll see the first thing you do is you find out what the risk assessment criteria are, what matters to the business and what matters to people we can hurt. It becomes very easy to have a conversation with an executive where you can say to the executive, right now, given the commonality of business email compromise, which is a real big issue for our peers, and look at these cases where it's happened, likelihood's fairly high. We actually are blind to these issues. It puts us into this much trouble for the way we do business. It hurts our customer trust in us, so it hurts our objectives this much. Because we've got employee health data in here, it hurts all these many people. We have obligation to protect that. Whatever we put into our risk analysis, we think this is one of our higher risks. Do you, executive, decide, because the risk assessment is something that we have to do and it's on record, do you decide that we're not going to invest in this risk when there are these other risks? That's up to you. Now the executive sees a business conversation happening rather than a technical one. Now that business executive can make a decision as they would make a decision in any other part of the business. And that's where we're trying to bring cybersecurity. So even though we've talked about it in terms of law, we invented it to take care of this latter problem. How do you talk to the executive so they make an informed decision? So people like us, the cybersecurity folks, aren't banging our head on the wall. We've done the job we need to do to inform. They've got the information to make the decision. It's their decision. Then we get on with our day.
Well, I definitely think it helps in like architectural decisions of what I've seen in many environments. They just go with some product that had some fancy capabilities. It says a number of different things, but I really don't know what all it covered. It kind of forces the reasonability, forces you to do the risk assessments, or you're going to be held liable. You just can't make arbitrary decisions that they can't be based in reason. The whole company needs to learn to adjust. And if it doesn't know the reasoning in the first place, it'll never adjust, and the mistakes will continue to occur.
Yeah. We've been very fortunate to see, because we've done this risk analysis for 15 years or so. And we've seen companies of all sizes and all industries. We've seen board members, executive committees say, yeah, this is how we want to do business. We want to make sure our decisions take as much into account of our employees, their families, our neighbors, the public, our customers. We want to show that we've taken as much care of them as us. In the back of this, keep in mind, there's this concept of reasonableness where we're also telling them, if you do this, we cap how much you have to spend on cybersecurity. So it's not as if it's just pure altruism. There's this idea that we've given people a fair playing field, fair to you, fair to everybody. And we've had hundreds of clients just take this on and say, yeah, I want to run my business this way. So that's given us a lot of optimism, even before there's ever a legal question. Yeah.
That's great. I think that's a great concept, and to make sure it is implemented more within different information security departments. It is definitely something I think can benefit greatly.
Yeah. So we encourage people to take a look at CIS-RAM. So we've got in the comments. If you're a do-it-yourselfer, you're following the instructions and getting it done, you might say, look, this is great, but we're a large organization. We can't run out of an Excel workbook. We'll have links to Haylock Security Labs. We help people with this stuff. Well, sometimes we're just pointing them to the free stuff. Sometimes we're helping them if they need it. And then Reasonable Risk is this application that we've done that allows people to just take everything they learned in CIS-RAM, just automate it. So they're having these conversations with executives without having to, create all the charts and figure out how to do the tricky conversations themselves. So we'll have links so people can see how all that works, but that's the purpose of what we're doing. And we're happy we've been able to make a difference, and we know we'll continue to.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. And I think having, understanding that you have those resources, understand what your company does, how they can really benefit. And it seems like really reduce the cost of cybersecurity because of having those reasonability and being able to have those risk assessments in place that just prove that your strategy is moving forward. I've been in many presentations, I've had strategies delivered, and I ask, how did you come up with, you're going to do $500,000 here, you're going to do $1 million on these systems and do that. Why? What are we fixing? And you have to ask that. That should be explained before kind of coming into
Yeah, definitely reduced costs in some cases where we're able to tell people, if your objective is to actually do this, you don't really need this control if you can do it with this smaller control. Absolutely right. But what it really does also is it reduces waste. So as you know, a lot of people will buy a tool that they can't operate, or they've turned on to the default settings and let it operate without really conditioning it or managing it,
Yeah.
thinking, I bought the tool, we're done. That's waste because you've made an investment that you don't realize the benefit from. If you're doing risk analysis and you can say, look, if I take on this thing that's very expensive, but I don't have, remember, there's a total cost of ownership question when you're talking about cost benefit. If I don't have the people that actually run that, that's not the right solution for me. So I either have to say, I need the personnel plus the process plus the tool, or I say, because I'll never get the personnel, I need a simpler way to solve the problem. It would be not reasonable to invest so much in something that I can't use. So you've hit on something really important, and that's cost management, whether you're reducing the amount you have to invest, or you're making sure you're not wasting what your investment is.
It's all good points. Well, Chris,
Yeah.
this has been a great conversation I've had with you today. I've learned a lot about DoCRA. I can definitely see where that's definitely going to be the standard moving forward. So it was very informative, and just a kind of a call to action. So as we're going to do the comments, you can put some of the risk assessment links that are in there. Also,
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about what can you find on your company's website, because you seem to really be have some good resources.
www.haylock.com is where you'll find the professional services stuff, because we're doing this stuff. We do the penetration testing and the engineering, and we have an excellent PCI DSS team. In fact, the only PCI DSS team I can think of in the world that knows both this reasonableness test and our expert QSAs. So their clients are able to get their ROC to be compliant and demonstrate the reasonableness, so that if something goes wrong, they're okay with the PCI Council and with any regulator that knocks on their door. But yeah, that's haylock.com. And then reasonableisk.com is the application that just automates a lot of this work. So you can pay attention to the work you got to do as a cybersecurity person. The machine, the reasonable risk system, actually creates the executive reports and then keeps track of progress, so you can have communication with executives to take care of all the governance part. So those are the commercial resources that I people look at. There's also CIS RAM, and we've got other material to help people understand the authority and the mechanism behind it.
Oh, that's great, Chris. Reducing the burden on the people trying to run that,
Yeah, just trying to get their jobs done. Yeah.
trying to get the jobs done. That's great. And also a call to action for us, everybody. If you like this episode, please hit that like button, put some comments in there. Chris, I'm sure we'll be more than happy to return any comments that you put there, and hit subscribe, and then share this out on your social links. We appreciate it, and have a great day.
It's a great program, Joshua. Thanks for having me.